are going to face suffering. It is a reality. In fact, everybody under the sound of my voice, I'm confident enough to know you've lived long enough that suffering is a part of your story. Suffering is a part of your story. And I want to say up front today that God knows about your suffering. God knows about my suffering. God knows about our suffering. God is well acquainted with your suffering. And this leads us to the first verse that I read there, Paul the Apostle writing to the Romans, and it's still applicable to you and I today. He says in Romans 8 and verse 18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." Notice what Paul the Apostle says. Paul, the one that was sent by Jesus Christ. He says, I consider that the sufferings of the present. Here's the great person that God used to write most of the New Testament, 17 books. And guess what? Here's someone that we would look to and say, man, he was a mighty man of God. God used him greatly. But here he also had suffering in his life. Listen, we don't need to believe the lies that being more of a man or a woman of God or following Jesus Christ longer than others is going to remove the fact of suffering in our life. Paul says there's suffering in my present. There's suffering in my moments. There's suffering in what is taking place in my life. But notice what he also says. He says, I consider something about it. Notice what he says. I consider that what's present in my life now cannot be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us. Notice what Paul does. He takes the present circumstances and he connects it to the future, that which shall be, and what connects what you're facing in the present to what shall be is what you consider. Can I tell you up front that the Lord wants to remind us today, wants to remind someone today to consider what you're going through in the present the way that the Apostle Paul considered his sufferings in the present. To consider that any suffering in your life is nothing compared to the glory which shall be, the glory that is coming, the glory that is in your future as you continue to move forward in what God has for you. The Lord wants to remind us to consider suffering this way in our life. To consider suffering the right way. That the sufferings in your life and even sufferings that may be present in your life are intended to lead to more glory being revealed in us. And the glory which shall be revealed can't even compare to what you're currently facing. See, some of you, God's given you desires. God's given you dreams. God's given you godly ambitions and godly plans and godly priorities and pursuits. And you got to understand that on the path of experiencing what God has put in you and called you to, there is going to be suffering. But here's how you need to consider the suffering the same way Paul did. The sufferings that I'm experiencing and I'm going through is nothing compared to the moment of when I experience the glory in all God has for me. In fact, in Colossians 1:27, Paul said, Christ in us is the hope of glory. How can you have any hope about your future, about the future of your life, about the next season that God has for you? How can you have hope about it? Why is there not despair about it? Why is there not depression about it? How can you have hope about your future? Paul says the reason is Christ is in you. Christ in you is the ability to have hope for future glory, to have hope for experiencing more of what God has for you. See, sufferings in your life are intended to lead to more of Christ being revealed in us. You got to understand that suffering, when it's allowed and when it comes into your life, it's intended to bring about more of Christ being revealed in you and through you. I need to tell someone today that the suffering of your story is for the revealing of His glory. I don't know the suffering that you brought in here today. I don't know all that's took place in your life today. I'm willing to hear it if you're willing to share it. I love entering into the journey of people with them as they, go through life. But here's what I do know. I know that the suffering of your story is for the revealing of God's glory. That we serve a God that's able to take suffering. He's able to take mistreatment. He's able to take missteps and turn it all into a testimony, all into a way that He can reveal His glory and His greatness and His goodness in and through your life. And Paul says that's the way I consider it. I am considering that the sufferings of my present or the sufferings of my past, that it is for the revealing of God's glory in my life. Hallelujah.